Hello, everybody. Hello. Thank you for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you all for joining. We're going to let a couple more people join. Emily, please just send me a ping or anything whenever you're ready to kind of actually get started here. I still see a couple more people flowing in. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to introduce myself. I am Alex Davidoff. I work at AlphaPoint, Director of Account Management and Business Development. With us today, we also have Reba Beeson, General Counsel at AlphaPoint, and Marcelo Miranda of Flow BTC out of Brazil. Marcelo, Reba, I don't know if either of you want to say any words before we get started.
Good morning. Welcome, everybody, and it's good to see you all. We look forward to getting started on a discussion today that's going to be kicked off by Alex and followed by Marcelo. And Marcelo, please feel free to add a few more comments.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Good morning, Alex and Reba. It's a pleasure to be here today. Hope to talk a lot about what's going on in crypto and strategies for launching. Very happy to be here today, guys.
Thank you both. So the topic of this webinar is from licensing to launch. The strategies and what it takes to actually, once you've decided to build an exchange or a crypto product, to actually get it out the door and get it launched. It is much easier said than done, as we've learned in our many years at AlphaPoint here. So one of the things that I wanted to kick off was the regulatory landscape and the compliance requirements. Fortunately, we have Reba here to kind of as our AlphaPoint's general counsel. Reba, I don't know if you could provide a high-level overview on what is a general requirement that exists in any jurisdiction globally to launch a crypto exchange, like a kind of a general regulatory body. What are some things that everybody has to do, no matter where you are?
Well, there's a lot of variation among the jurisdictions on a global basis as to what specifically is required. Some of it is mandated in very detailed terms, and other is just more what I call general provenance and governance around crypto and exchange operations. The high level approach on a global basis is to make sure that there's no nefarious activity being conducted on the exchanges and in the digital assets activities in general. And one way to screen for that is to have very sound KYC AML procedures in place. And then in addition to that, another high-level item is disclosures and making sure that there's full disclosure about what the nature of the activity is, how it might impact those who use the system, and any high-level risks that are associated with it.
Are there any sort of regulatory bodies that are always going to come into play here, such as OFAC?
Well, yes. So if we take it from the U.S. playbook, let's say, on the regulatory framework, we have the securities regulators, and in the U.S., that's the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. Also, depending upon whether the type of digital asset is considered a derivative, that would then fall within the purview of the CFTC in the U.S., the Commodities Futures Exchange Commission. And elsewhere in other jurisdictions, there are similar regulatory bodies. Sometimes they're collapsed into one. And then separate and apart from that, there are various states in the U.S. that govern the issuance and the activities around digital assets. So, for example, New York has a very strict, I would say, and robust regime for those types of activities that take place in the state of New York. And that's managed by the New York Department of Financial Services. And so from that, we can see that other jurisdictions around the globe look at it from, as I say again, a high level. What are the safeguards that can ensure that there's no nefarious activity being conducted? And how does one monitor for that? That would be KYC AML, and the travel rule, which is one that's a global guidance that a lot of jurisdictions follow. And then disclosures, making sure that there's robust disclosures so that those who use the system understand what it is and how they can use it and what the risks are.
So now FIT21 has been, the new crypto bill has been in the news here in the United States. How difficult then is that for an operator or a founder of a crypto product to pivot when a government just changes the rules in the middle of the game?
Well, that's one real key aspect, Alex, because one important aspect of engaging in any kind of digital asset activity is to understand whether the regulatory framework that's applicable to it has sound sustainability. So if the regulatory framework changes on an ongoing basis, it's hard for exchange operators, much less users of the system and others who participate, to understand what the rules of the road are. And that also impacts cost, and it impacts their strategy about how to go about doing the business. And so for sound regulatory guidance, it needs to be more long-term sustained. There are examples. I would say that MiCA in the EU is an example of one that probably will take hold and will be one that can have sustenance. In the US, and you mentioned the bill that was passed yesterday, the Financial Innovation and Technology Act, that was passed by a Republican-sponsored House, but it had bipartisan support. So that's an example of something that could take a foothold, but it yet has to be taken up by the Senate and then finally the president on the president's desk before it could be enacted. And after that, it would be implemented by regulations. So it's a very, very long process if it doesn't get enacted at all. And then on the other hand, we have somewhat conflicting messages. So for example, the SEC chairman, Gary Gensler, issued a very unusual warning that indicates that this bill and the approach to the regulatory framework could create new financial risks. Whatever that means, one doesn't know. This is all to be revealed, we would imagine. But there's also the political backdrop associated with any kind of legislation in the U.S. and the regulatory framework around it. And I think that in the global stage, we see those kinds of issues as well. But it's clearly a big risk factor for anyone getting involved in digital assets to understand how long sustainable the framework will be in that particular jurisdiction.
Now, Marcelo, you operate in Brazil, and this already kind of happened in Brazil, as we understand. I don't know if you can kind of speak to any of the changes that the legal structure there had and what the impact was on you, or what you foresee the impact being if they haven't been implemented yet.
For sure, Alex. It's very interesting because we had a very similar. We are in the process of having a very similar transition into a regulated market. So we started Flow BTC in 2015. That was in the old days of crypto. Nobody talked about regulation. Brazil has always taken a stance which we can consider a little more liberal than what we see in the US and other markets. Flow BTC was only the 5th exchange to start operating in Brazil. And from that point on, we started to see a big growth in the number of players because there were no licenses. Obviously, the barrier of entry was low. We started to see a big growth in Bitcoin crypto adoption in general because of this more sort of freedom in terms of operating a crypto business, which was good and helped boost that initial traction. But in other ways was bad because there wasn't really no prevention for the bad actors, right? So we started to see a lot of cases of fraud. We started to see a lot of cases of Ponzi schemes, rug pulls, and whatnot. And so I think Brazil is a very good example of what can be done. Like there is the good side, but also what can go wrong in terms of not having the regulation in place, or at least a clear guidance from regulators. So I think was back on 2019, 2020, we started to have conversations with regulator. I myself went to the Capitol a couple of times, to Congress, and there was I think it was a good kind of a good case of conversation with the market, between regulators and the market. And that ended up with this past legislation, which is very similar in spirit, at least with FIT 21, and it already passed in Congress, got approval by the president, and now what it basically did was appointing the regulator, which is the Central Bank of Brazil in this case, and the CVM, which is sort of like our SEC in Brazil for certain cases, like a security token, for example. So it determined who are the regulators. It made a very clear cut. How can I say? It made very clear what if you commit some sort of fraud, if you do a Ponzi scheme, for example, you'll go to jail. That will be a criminal case. So it sets certain parameters that now this regulator is in the process of coming up with more details and sort of a roadmap for the exchanges to get the license. So I think we're like maybe 1 or 2 years ahead of what's happening now with FIT 21. And I believe this is a very positive for Brazil.
In the United States, I mean, for the past decade, we've seen the regulators essentially like where you had talked about this, where there's like either too little or too much regulation. And we've been very much on the other side, closer to the other side of the barrier there with too much. Do you feel that what's going on in Brazil could affect a lot of what we've seen here in the United States is kind of the stifling, and a lot of the industry has left the United States and gone global as a result. Do you feel that what's happening in Brazil could produce that result, or is the regulation kind of something in place that's going to help grow the industry there?
I don't get the feeling that we're going to have an exodus of Brazil because of this. I think so far from what I saw, it seems pretty well calibrated to what we need, and I think we'll probably be seeing cases of. I'll give you an example. In Brazil, as I said, it's a more liberal market, more like open than the U.S. We have like a bunch of exchanges in comparison to the U.S. You have a few very large exchanges, much more concentrated here than in Brazil. But we do, for example, get a lot of competition because it's more open. We get a lot of competitions from the foreign exchanges, like the big global exchanges like Binance and other even American exchanges are setting up there. So it's right now it's not a really level playing field, because if you are a local player, you have to comply with much more than an outside player that comes in Brazil and compete with you and have like probably more funding, more marketing budgets than the local player. So I believe if it's going to be good to make it more of a level playing field and make these exchanges from abroad to kind of, okay, we're going to operate in Brazil. We need to have a minimum structure there, which will be also good for new jobs in this in our field and things like that.
Now, the outside competitors, they come in with huge budgets, not in sales, marketing, and everything else, but they also come in with huge technology budgets. Now, obviously, you license AlphaPoint for your software, but then where does that kind of give you an advantage in helping them compete with them? Where, like, because it's not because AlphaPoint isn't the only piece of the technology that you need to operate. So, where then, like, how important is technology to the operation? Where does that fit in to how you're able to compete with these new players in the market with the new regulatory landscape?
That's a great question, Alex. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to have everything in order when comes the time that you're going to face regulators and demands of reports and things like that. I'll give you an example. That was probably the first thing we had demand from a regulator was from our tax department, our IRS in Brazil, that they, I think it was 2018, they started to demand reports from all trades. Like no matter if you're like doing like a little trade, like a couple satoshis, or if you're like trading huge, we needed to report every single trade to the IRS. So if we did not have, for instance, AlphaPoint as our backend to, to be able to organize all this information and build, as you said, build a couple components to prepare that data to be able to submit that on a regular basis to the regulators, will be really screwed. So I know of other exchanges in Brazil that had a lot of problems with that just because they didn't have the proper systems. Things were being done in a very artisanal way, and having institutional grade software like AlphaPoint made everything so easy. Like it's, I come from the banking industry, from sales and trading in large firms, and I can tell like what I had with AlphaPoint was on par with things I had in financial institutions. And I know not everybody in Brazil had that, so they had to do a lot of catch up to be ready for these things. And more of these things obviously are going to come with the real regulation.
Yeah, it's easy to say though that you license a technology provider, but then you could turn around and do whatever you need to the data. So I guess kind of question for Reba then is, how does the technology provider then guarantee the authenticity of the data that is produced within the product?
Well, from a tech perspective, I would defer
Yep.
to you and the tech team to
Yep.
answer it. But the benefit that AlphaPoint's platform can provide is that it has the tools that an operator can use in whatever way it needs to capture the data that's necessary to provide regulatory responses. So, for example, the response to the tax regulators that Marcelo mentioned, it is a critical need of most operators. And so the way that an operator can use the system is to capture whatever data is required and have and give AlphaPoint the requirements that are needed to be able to facilitate that. And so the system is nimble in that regard. And also the system allows for integration of bespoke service providers who can help support it. So, for example, software services providers who might be able to do the filings, the reporting directly to the regulators and the like.
Well, AlphaPoint software is SOC certified, SOC 1 and 2, I believe, type 2. How important is that to just have to be able to hand over to a regulator and say, okay, well, it's pretty clear we can't make changes to a lot of the data because the product won't allow us to? I mean, is that really important from like how important is that to just kind of getting over the line from a technology perspective? Like with a regulator when you're dealing with them. I mean, you've seen this a little bit more than I have. That's kind of what I'm asking.
You're asking Marcelo, right?
I'm asking you, Reba.
Oh,
Like
yes. Well,
how
yeah.
important is this
Yes.
the SOC certification to kind of just like what like AlphaPoint has it, but dealt with some technology providers and integrated with some technology providers who do and some who don't. We've seen them have challenges with their products in not being able to just say, hey, there's a certain amount of data that can be changed and there's a certain amount of data that can't be changed. How important is that to be able to demonstrate to a regulatory body that the data is authentic and can't be modified or otherwise tampered with?
Well, the reason why SOC is important is because we've established policies and procedures and standards by which we provide our service. And so specifically then taking that established framework that we have and applying it to data collection and how an operator uses the system, it can inform a regulator as to how sound it is. So if we take TradFi, just by way of analogy, and in the US brokerage system and the regulatory framework, there are very specific requirements about capturing the data on trades, not manipulating that data, being able to offer it to a regulator literally at the moment it's requested, so that the regulator can see it and get comfortable that it is in compliance with the respective regulatory framework. And so I think that it's really important for systems like the one that AlphaPoint has been developing and has, has 11-year track record of having offered into the marketplace. It's very important that the SOC type of reporting is available. And that's why AlphaPoint spent a lot of time creating the system that can get there.
Now, Marcelo, AlphaPoint's not the only software vendor that you use. So do you see kind of similar challenges with the other vendors in terms of the other products that you need to integrate in with your tech stack?
Yes, I think it's for all the vendors and all the local players. It's being every day learning something new, and every day having to put together something new. So I'll give you another example. It's kind of on a weekly basis. We get requests from investigator, police, courts for fraud cases that not necessarily involve anyone. It's just like digging into some case, and they have the power of law to come and request data from the exchange. So I cannot refuse to give data, even though it's not even our client or have nothing to do with our exchange, and not even a client that is registered and never traded. But even if it's nothing like that, I'm still by law required to provide information, even if it's no information. So this is the type of thing that's, if you are not ready to go like show in your systems, like give some sort of, you don't give access to your systems, obviously, but you need to show that you have good sound data in place, like good systems, and they will look into it. So that's one example that we have to adjust ourselves all the time for the regulator. So it's a challenge for every software, not only AlphaPoint. And if we locally don't have that flexibility with our core systems, like for example I have with AlphaPoint, it's very hard to comply with those things.
Okay. And especially now with, like you said, the regulatory landscape changing, there's obviously kind of a huge amount of value in being able to kind of quickly be able to say that you're able to license a proven software provider. What does that also provide you in the rest of the market? When you're dealing with your own customers, like, do the customers kind of look at the rest of your tech stack and know that it's going to be verifiable, or is that something that and it's okay if that's the answer, is that something that's kind of dismissed and they just want the product to work?
Yeah, I think for the end clients, just like as long as it's smooth for them and it works,
Yep.
they don't really care about what's behind it.
Okay.
It's really important, and we had cases, even for example, investors that are looking to fund us, and we had that situation in the past. They want to know. That's when you want to show that everything is robust, right? That your systems uh, are secure. Like I think that's number one. Like, are you going to have some hacking issue? Uh, so that's always been like the first question. Then, of course, are you complying with the regulator? Are you like, do you have the capability to, generate any type of information or proof that you are, uh, you know, working on a sound environment? That's that's very key for us. That has been very key for us.
So from the community side, it's you more see the technology coming into play when you move further upstream to like your most important clients and also to your potential investors, in addition to the regulators. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so the top of the market really wants to know what you're doing on the tech stack side.
Yeah.
Okay, Reba, I don't know if you have anything to add there in terms of where, um, if there's any kind of challenges or pitfalls anybody might need to navigate when looking at the top, kind of catering to the top customer base. I mean, you would still need to keep the playing field completely level. Um, but is there anything legally that an operator has to worry about when kind of going toward, kind of making moves that may benefit the top of the market?
Well, certainly in the world of what I'd say regulatory governance of financial institutions, of which a digital assets operator might be classified in a particular jurisdiction, yes. So in addition to what I mentioned, securities regulators, there's also the overarching financial system regulators. So in the example, in the US, it would be the Fed, the Federal Reserve. And they have other requirements, such as capital requirements and reporting requirements, and the too big to fail categorization of certain financial institutions that are governed by the US regulatory authority. So these overarching concerns are supplemental to the operational concerns, but have to take into account things like sound financial accounting, sound capital maintenance, all these other things that can cause an operator to incur additional costs, needs to be factored into their budget as to how they operate their system. And they have to be nimble, because sometimes these rules change. And we know that MiFID, for example, the new rules on MiFID will be implemented next year. They have quite an onerous cap requirement for some of these types of assets, like digital assets. So these are other considerations that need to be taken in place. And they're ones that policymakers are deeply involved in, and the operators should be engaged with these decision makers in understanding what these risks might be and where the opportunities could lie.
And we see a lot of growth here in the DeFi and the NFT space. Um, where then, I don't know if that's been defined legally in the United States or if there's anything that you can add to that. But then when you're talking about everything changing and staying ahead of things, let's say, for example, you're not adding a DeFi or an NFT product. Let's say it's a tokenized real world asset, which we see a lot of expanding in the marketplace. Then how does an operator have to pivot if they were to enter any of those other new sectors that are popping up?
Well, from a U.S. regulatory perspective, the SEC commissioner has made it clear that the existing legal framework and the regulatory framework applies. And so the question then becomes, you mentioned DeFi and NFTs.
Yeah.
How does that fit into a framework that's been in existence for almost 100 years? How does one really repurpose that framework to apply to these new businesses, new products, new activities? It's not easy. And oftentimes those who are operating or participating in those activities learn through enforcement that perhaps what they're doing is not compliant. And so we need to be much more innovative, I think, from a regulatory policymaking perspective to address these new products and services and activities in the market, because we also, in the US, and it applies to every jurisdiction, need to be thinking about how it intersects and interacts with the global participants, and then also how we can, in our individual jurisdictions, help build out a system that will be that will create jobs and help sustain the economy of these different environments.
Now, Marcelo, we know we've talked about this where, we wanted to add additional products. I know that we've kind of had preliminary discussions about real world assets, NFTs, DeFi. What are the other challenges that you face? It's like from the technology side, you license AlphaPoint's Apex product, so it's fairly simple. But then what are the other challenges that you face to getting those products actually listed and being able to trade them?
Yeah, I think it's the same for us. Like I said, I think we're a little bit ahead of the US in that. For instance, when it comes to real world assets, we have a sandbox by our SEC in Brazil that has been running for a year, over a year, with a few players that are allowed to trade real world assets like tokenized shares of companies and tokenized debt and things like that. So this is ongoing. Obviously, it's a huge effort for those that want to get into these sandboxes in terms of preparation, and it's an annoying process, but it can be done. And I think it's the challenge is still on the regulatory framework, even with that happening, because obviously, if you want to try different products, and we know, I mean, we are a startup, we are in the startup world. You wanna do experiments. You want to try a market, doesn't work, pivot, try another thing, doesn't work, pivot. And once you have to stay in a year-long process, application process to try something, obviously it makes very expensive and and the time to market doesn't work to doing these types of experiments. So I think it's still kind of, even though we are a little bit ahead of the US, I believe, that's my opinion. I think we're still kind of tied to what can be done and what cannot be done in the regulatory side. Obviously, there's always a way to bypass that and do something elsewhere, like in another jurisdiction. But then you have limitations of distribution and other things. So it ends up being a trade-off, and we are more on the opinion and preference to, okay, this may take a long time, but we're going to do this locally, and we're going to go step by step with the regulation. It's a decision. It's a business decision at the end.
Got it.
If I
Thank
could
you for sharing.
Please. Excuse me. If I could just
Please.
add to what Marcelo has been saying, yes, sandboxes can provide a great environment for development of these kinds of products. One other item I would add to all of that is that in developing products in the US, the most recent experience of wrapping a product would be the Bitcoin ETFs, and maybe in the near future, ETH ETFs. So there, we're creating a security, which is a traditional security the Wall Street firms have created for a long time, offered it through a public exchange, and it's one in which there's been sound practices built around regulating those assets because they're treated as securities, traditional securities in that regulatory framework. So to the extent that you can create products that get wrapped in something that is akin to a traditional regulated asset, there's, I think, a better chance for that to find a good market, a robust market, a liquid market, and one that is regulatory sound.
Great, great. I know we weren't really planning on this, but we're going to do a QA. I saw a raised hand here. So if anybody would like to ask a question of myself or any of the other participants, please raise your hand and the moderator will unmute you. Hello, Chidi, is that correct how you say your name? Hi, we can't hear you if you're speaking. Hello, Chidi, can you can you please check your audio and see if it's connected? Okay. If there are any other members of the audience who would like to ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand and our moderator will unmute you to ask a question. We'll still allow Chidi to stay here and try to reconnect audio in the meantime. While we're waiting for any other questions, I don't know. What's next, Marcelo? What's coming next in Brazil? What do you see coming down the pipeline?
We do have also a lot going on the regulated side regarding ETFs, like Reba said, and funds like regular mutual funds in Brazil already offering crypto. And right now, it's something interesting that the regular funds in Brazil, regulated funds, can have crypto products, but they cannot trade crypto locally. So they have to set up an offshore scheme in Cayman Islands or something and trade crypto from there. But it seems like this is changing. So it could be a boost in local trading in Brazil. So let's see.
Reba, you haven't read the Fit 21 bill, I know, but what's your kind of overall opinion on, like, this is kind of a big watershed moment, it feels like, where both parties have kind of made a big pivot to embrace crypto. What do you think is going to happen to the crypto regulatory landscape? I know that a lot of this might just be election year posturing, but kind of curious to hear your overall thoughts on where the regulatory pivot is going to come here.
Oh, that's a great question, Alex. I think that the way you've characterized it is correct. It's posturing at this point. I personally don't see this bill going anywhere. We've had so many bills get at least aired in the House and some in the Senate, and they're not going anywhere. So I think that we really need to get a deeper understanding of how we can inform the legislators and the policymakers of how critically important the digital assets space it can contribute to the overall economy of America, and also show data about how there's such a groundswell of offshore activity occurring because we don't have a regulatory framework to support the activity in the US. And I think ultimately, as more of that momentum shifts offshore, we'll get a better reception in DC, because it really does boil down to having to show how it impacts the economy.
Yeah, it seems like we have a regulatory, like we do have a regulatory framework. It's just a very oppressive, intrusive regulatory framework, more akin to the Russias and the Chinas, maybe not that extreme. that's Russia and China. But where you see, I mean, Marcelo has spoken about Brazil, but we've seen a large number of other jurisdictions that have taken the lead from the United States. I don't know. Do you think it's possible for the United States to make? Do you think? Well, how's this? Do you think the United States will make that pivot
I
to
think,
become a
yes, it
leader
has
again?
to.
Think so.
It has
Okay.
to. I think it will be forced to, but it won't be forced to by any one industry participant trying to have conversations in Washington. I think it'll be forced by the momentum that's evidenced by the economy and by the benefits of innovation and how that can impact favorably the U.S. economy, and the inverse of how it can adversely affect the economy when more and more activity goes offshore.
Marcelo, Reba, I don't know if there's any other topics you wanted to discuss before we wrapped up here. If either of you wanted to kind of cover something that we may not have covered here today.
Well, I think you've really touched on all the key bases, Alex. Thank you, and Marcelo for your input as well. The only thing I would add is to say that I really do think we have to think of the regulatory framework as one of the key themes when devising a strategy about how to get involved in the crypto space, how to set up an exchange, think about the risk, but also about the opportunities, and find the right spot that works for each individual participant.
Yeah, I would agree with Reba, and also I think we cover a lot here, and could be a little scary for someone that is just thinking about like starting operations in in this regulated environments. But I think especially with what I'm seeing from this Fit 21, I always like the other regulators elsewhere look up to the regulators in the U.S. I think if we go so far from what I've seen, I think if we go that route, I think it could be a good sign, sending a good signal globally, and could be very positive for crypto globally.
Great, great. So we have one question from the audience, which we'll take before we end this, if that's okay. Samuel, thank you for joining today. Samuel, I don't know. I don't know if we have to move Samuel into the panel to have him chat or not, but it seems like he's unmuted here.
Okay.
There you are. Hey, Samuel, great to speak with you today.
So you can
What's
hear
on your
me?
mind? Yes, now we can.
Great. Thank you for putting this on today. I do appreciate it. So I go with you. I purchase your system to use as our crypto exchange. What level of support, technology-wise, for ideas and the ability for us to move on to other areas that have yet to be seen in crypto? How flexible are you in those areas, and including your ability to guide, just like your title says, proven strategies for crypto exchange founders? And so I would see that as, being able to launch from licensing to launch. I am aware of the various different licenses and everything involved. So how in sync are you with a company that is looking for that right company to get us to where we want to be, like within a 6-month or less period of time?
The software is fully configurable and customizable, and it's not limited to what's on the crypto market right now. If you're listing and building and creating a new product that's regulated within the ecosystem, you can do that right now with the software. And I think Marcelo can also speak to you about some of the things that he's done with his exchange instance as well. In terms of what he's done with the product.
Yeah, for sure. It's very straightforward and easy to set up. For us in Brazil, we had to do some localization, for example, for decimal separators that we use different than the US. But even that was really really easy to use. And I think in terms of going to market fast, something that was important for us back then was something like in less than 3 or 4 months we were ready to go and be up and running. So for us, it was a very positive thing to have chosen AlphaPoint.
Yeah,
What
and
if I wanted to go to Brazil and be able to offer the Brazilian people our services and so forth? Are you knowledgeable in that area of what is required from licensing to launching there?
Yeah, like I said, in Brazil, the regulation is still not applicable. They're still kind of creating that. Pretty soon will be harder, but if you start now, I think you can just obviously you need to have a local entity, and I'm not sure how you do that, being not being a Brazilian, but for sure, lawyers can do that for you, and just get set up with a bank account and things like that. So this is not hard to be done in a place that is not regulated, like Brazil is not yet. So I don't think it's only Brazil. I think most unregulated places you can get set up really quickly. Is more on a technical side than in the any bureaucracy that you need to cover.
So basically, AML and KYC, if you understand those basics and have it done, you'll be liked from the start rather than just the Wild West going out there and anything goes.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, obviously, anti-fraud is the big component. It's crazy how people can be creative and try to, bypass KYC and try to, do all sorts of schemes. So I think the AML and the KYC and all these processes, they are obviously good for internal reasons as well, right? Not just for the regulators, but for your own good, your own operation. So it's like I said, you need to get this right, and then I think like in unregulated markets, you're ready to go.
yeah, one of the things we've noticed here is that KYC it's extremely region specific. What is required for Marcelo in Brazil is not going to be required for somebody in Australia or Singapore or Dubai or Abu Dhabi even. There's differences between Abu Dhabi and Dubai's licensing schemes just within the United Arab Emirates. So
Right.
every single region you go to is going to have a different KYC requirement. And AlphaPoint, you can integrate your KYC vendor with our product and manually and not manually use automation to kind of move your customers through the KYC process. It is something that you will need to figure out on a region by region basis.
Correct. Okay.
I hope that answers your questions.
It does. It does.
Okay.
That's very important. So if I were to obtain your product for this, and I'm sure we could, talk offline on this too as well. But in a quick nutshell, how far is it that you go from A to Z, anywhere in between? Is there anything that I've missed?
It would, in terms of what would actually need to launch, it would depend on what sort of a product you're trying to launch on a very specific basis. And I'll be able to kind of connect you with some of our SDRs to kind of get you started on the demo process. Sales in general is not what I'm 100% focused on. A lot of what I'm focused on is on the operational side and keeping things up and running for both our clients and for our partners. So
Yeah.
you may see me in the sales process if that's the route you decide to go. You may
Yeah.
not. But once you sign on the dotted line, you'll always have access to somebody like me and members of my team as well.
Yeah, I'm already in contact too as well, by the way.
Great.
So it's just timing, and I had this on the schedule for quite some time ago before talking with him. So I'll just save you the time that I'm already there, and you have my name. So
Great.
we're going to be hitting up on that.
Excellent.
But I do
Great to hear.
appreciate it. And I'm very focused now at this time to be able to. You've heard of the new word out there, tokenization of just about anything, because of entities and clients that we have. That's what we're looking into, not just a crypto exchange, buy and sell, but also the other end of it, to be able to tokenize assets, tokenize just about everything that that is recorded. So that's the direction that we want to move into as well, whether it be part of the exchange or something separate from that that's created specifically for that. So instead of reinventing the wheel, we're looking for that niche that can be filled and the capabilities of to be able to set that standard that we're looking for and go from there. So that's it in a nutshell. And I like to be able to see if AlphaPoint at one time, rather than just a crypto exchange, because we all know the value of what a crypto exchange can do, not just make money, but the information and the assets that is on there, whatever those assets may be, how they could be recorded and transferred, and so forth. It's transactions don't necessarily mean just coins of money, right? It means whatever property that you have, whatever that asset is, whatever that information is, going back and forth. So that's my final question to you. What do you see AlphaPoint going in the future for tokenization stuff of all these assets?
We'd almost look in the past because we have clients who've done this already, and we
Yeah.
could point to some use cases of examples where clients have actually done everything that you're talking about.
Great.
So it's totally the product could get you it's not going to get you a regulatory license, for example, but from the technology side, it's going to get you almost all the way there.
Good.
Like there are some things that you will need to do on your own, such most important of which being KYC. But we do integrate with KYC providers. So yeah, definitely happy to kind of connect with you separately on this, and help you out and and kind of understand what your use case is and where you're trying to go.
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for asking your questions today. We have time for one more question. I don't know if anybody else wants to ask a question here, but we're going to have to take one more and then we're going to wrap up. Okay. If there's no other questions, thank you, Reba and Marcelo, for joining today and for conducting this webinar with me. Thank you all for attending, and we look forward to hearing from you and about your endeavors in the future in some capacity.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Reba.
Take care. Have a great one. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.